So go. Welcome, friends, again to Chapter 6 of Mad Bear, The Best of Both Worlds. Most people get confused between foresight and fate. When United Nations Day was over and subsequent press conferences and interviews concluded, all the contingents, guests, and participants returned to the four directions and across the great waters, as the native residents had put it. With the coming of November, the air turned crisp and the days grew shorter. Though there were still crowds in the streets, the restaurants, and the hotel lobby, the city felt almost lonely when all the delegates left. The various representatives had been dispersed throughout the city, but the Lexington Hotel had accommodated almost all of the Native American delegation. They had dominated the lobby and the coffee shops, and the impression endured with the hotel personnel. "Our natives looked so majestic," they would say. "Do you think they'll be back?" Or, "I saw our natives on the television. Those were our natives, weren't they?" Somewhere out in the cold Atlantic floated one costly bottle of whiskey, and if the ritual had been successful, or if it had been meant to be, it would one day reach some European shore. Perhaps it would sink on its way. Perhaps it would freeze. Or perhaps, once again, it would simply cease to exist. It seemed a strange sort of objective for which to make medicine, to send one bottle of firewater back in the direction whence its kind had so long ago arrived to plague the indigenous peoples. Still, it had been done with dispassion and is a symbol of detachment, and may well have served as an evocation of volition. In Lower Manhattan, there is a small piece of raw, untouched ground surrounded by a fence with a sign claiming it to be a single preserved sample of the original native land. Looking through that fence at the cluster of growth, primitive trees, shrubs, and weeds that now appeared foreign in this city, one could contemplate distant centuries and the people who then walked upon this ground. Life must have been much different back when the natives had Manhattan, or whatever they called it then. Mad Bear had carried with him from his trading post some ancient beads and medals that had originally been brought over from across the great waters. Trinkets that had been handed down from the days of the newcomers. These were some of the handful of beads with which the Europeans were said to have purchased Manhattan from the natives. The natives being savage and backward and having little understanding of the value of land. This fiction was almost a laughing matter to the Haudenosaunee delegation, who looked over these antique items and talked about that part of history, except that it was not actually funny. "I hope you don't believe it," one of them had remarked to me. "Your history teachers like to think our people were stupid. Imagine our ancestors jumping up and down, 'Oh boy, shiny objects.' They were not that stupid. Our people were looked up to in the beginning. We got along good in the beginning. If our ancestors had turned their backs on the first palefaces, they never would have made it." The newcomers had almost nothing. They were fleeting from their homeland, and we helped them supply their needs. They gave us what little they had to give, and we accepted these simple trinkets out of friendship, and it was not in exchange for the land or in exchange for anything. We never thought about selling land. That's a disrespect for the earth, if you think about it. But now we are all forced to participate in it. Our people never would have dreamed up such a notion. Over the past week, the Haudenosaunee had several times conducted their official welcomes. They had not only been invited as delegates, but had also, in a sense, been acknowledged as hosts. Now Beeman, Mad Bear, Alex, Crow, Anyas, Sandy, Grandfather David, Rolling Thunder and his people, and all the others had returned to their homes in the west or in the north, and left me in New York to wind up our remaining business. I closed out the safety deposit box and settled the accounts for more than a dozen rooms. Only my room on the 23rd floor was retained, on a special weekly rate, which eventually became nearly 2 months. One evening, I was invited to join a New York literary agent and some of his friends for dinner in his apartment in Upper Manhattan. As we talked, We moved into the living room and sat with our coffee in front of a large window that looked out upon perhaps hundreds of other windows above and below us. One of our party called our attention to this scene. You know, this place was Indian territory once. Manhattan used to belong to these Iroquois people you're talking about. Their spirituality may endure, but I think it's pretty much right on. I mean, I have no argument with their beliefs, and I admire them for hanging on to them, but obviously, their culture is long gone. Someone else said, "Everything's got to give way to progress sooner or later. Maybe it's not even progress. Technology marches on, and sooner or later, it takes over everything in its path." I looked out through the dense concrete forest of residential skyscrapers. "I don't know," I said. "The natives were always pointing out how these grasses kept growing up right through the concrete, breaking it up, actually, eating it. It may look like the concrete has the upper hand at the moment, but it's really very temporary. So are the cities, and so are we. We're so dependent on it," I went on. "What happens if we run out of water, or if it's shut off for whatever reason, for a month or so? We've had so-called brownouts here, but what if there's no electricity for a month, or there's a gas shortage and all the trucks and buses stop running? I love the city myself, in spite of what Mad Bear says. But the point is, we've got ourselves in a pretty vulnerable situation. The traditional way of life on the land is here to stay, no matter what happens to the rest of us. A collapse or a failure in any of our intricate and complex systems would cause panic and havoc and horrible suffering, while the natives out on the reservation would go on just about the same." "Maybe," someone said, "but give me this lifestyle any day. I wouldn't want to live out in some teepee or wigwam trying to chase after something to eat or stomping around a fire, slapping my knees and trying to keep warm." "I don't think I would either," I said. "I don't know, I've never tried it. But some of the best times I've had and the happiest people I've ever met have been out on the reservations or in little country villages." "Still, without technology," he replied, "you could never travel to all these places." "I know," I answered. "I'm not saying I don't approve of technology. I'd like to see even more. I'd like to see more people travel from continent to continent, to reach out across the planet and even into the cosmos. But, you know, that's a significant part of the Native American wisdom. It's in their historical records, and in their prophecies too. Maybe what we're growing toward, if we can make it, is the best of both worlds." In mid-November, while I was still in New York City, one of the Grateful Dead came to town and he reached me by phone to tell me about the Rolling Thunder Revue. They're heading up this way now, and they have a concert coming up in that big convention center in Niagara Falls. Dylan and the whole bunch will be checking into the Hilton up there next week. I thought I'd let you know so that maybe you could make it up there. But I didn't know where they'd be performing. I had already heard about the Rolling Thunder Revue from one of Rolling Thunder's acquaintances, a man he had once met on the railroad. This man had worked with the Grateful Dead and other groups through Rolling Thunder's introduction. He had been with Rolling Thunder's party during the first days at the UN. Then he announced that he was leaving to join this Rolling Thunder Revue as road manager. "I'll be around Niagara Falls anyway," I told him on the phone, "because I'm going back up to Mad Bear's from here." "Well, they just worked out their agenda, but they'll be right up there at the Hilton. You ought to get in touch. You know, give Dylan your Rolling Thunder book. That's probably where they got the name for this thing. Rolling Thunder had developed an acquaintance with many good musicians. One of these was Ramblin' Jack Elliott, whom I had seen more than once at Rolling Thunder's place in Nevada. Ramblin' Jack was a part of this tour, I had learned, and I suppose the idea for the name may have come from him. Before I left New York, I spoke with Mad Bear. He was enthusiastic. "We gotta go," he said. "I mean, maybe we ought to take in this whole thing." By the time he picked me up in Niagara Falls, I was discouraged. I had taken the usual airport bus from Buffalo and had disembarked at the Hilton Hotel. I had mentioned all the names I knew. I even mentioned the Rolling Thunder Revue. "No, there's no one here by that name either," I was told. "No, but that's the name of the tour." "Well, there's no one by that name here." I could have guessed that the musicians would not have registered under their known names. It was possible that they were all listed under the name of the road manager, but though I had met him twice, I could not recall his last name. "Well, don't worry," Mad Bear reassured me as we drove back toward the reservation. "It'll probably come to you what that fellow's name is. We'll think of something, or else we'll just go hang out by the back door and I betcha we'll be able to grab him coming in or out. I sure wouldn't expect us to compete with that mob just to get into the concert. And there's going to be a mob because they're really got the word out now. I mean, to hear my nephews talk, the whole human population is nuts about their concerts. Anyway, we're the only ones who know where they're staying. Just think, all these people and we got the advantage. And we're not even fans of these people, at least I'm not yet anyways. Although that's not saying I won't become one if I get to go to their concert." We pulled into the driveway, and Mad Bear jumped out to unlock his garage door. "Oh, that's right," he said, snapping his fingers. "I can't pull the car in. We've got to let your bed down." "Well, come on in through this way, and we'll get your sleeping quarters squared away. Have you eaten? I bet you're nice and hungry, aren't you?" "Well, I bet you are," I said to myself. You know, I was thinking, if we don't make contact with Dylan and them, we ought to drive out and see Sandy. You know, who we had down there with us in New York. Just say hello, I guess. No particular reason. It's a pretty far drive out there, but she's been on my mind a couple times. She just popped up again, like maybe she's trying to tell me something. Since we can't call her, I was thinking maybe... He sat down and closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened his eyes and softly spoke the name I had been struggling to remember. Perhaps Sandy had somehow helped. I did not take time to discuss it or even give it much thought. I went to the phone, called the hotel, asked for registration, and gave the name that worked. And instead of, "There's no one hereby," I heard a ringing, and then, "Hello?" On the day of the concert, we drove to the Hilton Hotel. I had a book for Bob Dylan, and Mad Bear had something at a little sack. I had spoken again to the road manager before we left the house, and he was waiting for us in the lobby. "Come on," he said. "They're all over there already." I was sure that a couple of unexpected gift bearers would be a little less than welcome just before the concert. "I was just going to give this to you and let you give it to Dylan," I told him. No, Mad Bear quickly piped up, pulling on my arm. "Let's go on over there and see him." We walked to the convention center. There were mobs of people indeed, mostly young people, stretching for blocks. There were more than could fit into even this huge place. There were also mobs of police, it seemed, but not enough to keep more than a semblance of order. People were pushing and shoving and trying to climb up and over the tall fence that surrounded the convention center, only to be pulled down by one another if not by the police. We were escorted inside. On several sofas in one backstage room sat Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, T-Bone, Ramblin' Jack, and several others I didn't know. We were introduced and I presented the book. "And this is a little something I put together," said Mad Bear, handing Dylan his little package. "You can use this in your pipe or whatever." Dylan put his nose in the bag and sniffed. "No, it's not what you might be thinking," Mad Bear laughed. "But then it's not nothing either, that's for sure." Before long, Mad Bear and I were on the stage, seated behind rows of mics, drums, cables, lights, and amplifiers. We could hear very clearly, and we could even see, in a sense, a sort of rear-end perspective. In the distance, beyond the stage, barely visible across the bright lights, stretched a sea of undulating bodies. Mad Bear kept making comments in my ear. "We brought something for Dylan only, and here we are kind of like their guests. That's too bad. You ought to have a little something for all of them." It was a while before Dylan made his grand entrance, and then the focus and the revere was centered on him. At one point he announced, "I'd like to dedicate this song to my friend Mad Bear right here." And he turned and waved an arm in our direction. Mad Bear clasped his hands together and shook them high above his head. Apparently, we were more visible where we sat than I had thought. In any case, the crowd roared, including those, no doubt, who had no idea what this was all about. "Well, I'll think of something," Mad Bear said. "We'll have to come up with something." He took from his wallet a small folded receipt and scribbled something in the corner. I supposed he was making a note for some gift idea. He tore off the corner and handed me the tiny piece of paper. "How's this? You think it'll work? It's kind of sloppy, but we don't have anything else here. I sure hope it'll go over okay." I squinted to read the words. "You and the whole bunch of you are all invited out to the reservation for a big native feed tomorrow afternoon. RSVP, your friend, Mad Bear." I handed it back and only nodded. A big feed. I knew that the whole bunch, if it included all the backup musicians and crew, added up to over 50 people. It needed some discussion, but this was not the place for it. The necessary conversation occurred early the following morning over the little percolator. At the first opportunity, Mad Bear had handed the strange little note directly to Dylan right there at the back of the stage. "I sure hope you'll pardon the informality," he had said. "It's not a very proper invitation. This little piece of paper is all we had here, but don't take it as an indication of the feast to come." Of course, neither Dylan nor the several others who stood looking over his shoulder could RSVP on behalf of the entire crew. They would have to let us know. Before we left the convention center that evening, we had learned of their acceptance, and in the morning the arrangements were beginning. Arrangements that consumed the entire day. There would be not only the entire crew of something of over 70, but also more than 70 natives as well. They would be coming from all around, and many of them very soon so that they could get started with the preparations. Several of the tribal chiefs would be waiting in their cars at the edge of the reservation to meet the Rolling Thunder Review caravan of vehicles and provide a benefiting escort to the Tuscarora School Gymnasium and Auditorium. Mad Bear had managed to procure this community site for the banquet, and nearly a dozen clan mothers had agreed to cook and serve. But what was being dangerously left until the last minute was the matter of procuring some of the food for this banquet. Not even Mad Bear's kitchen could possibly have on hand sufficient provisions to feast nearly 200 individuals. "I know," Mad Bear said. "We've got to get the food lined up, and plenty of it. I mean more than plenty. The food, that's the foundation of this whole thing. But we did have to confirm that we could really pull it off first, before we stuck our neck out on 2-3 tons of food. Anyways, I had an idea in the back of my mind the whole while. We can give our whole order to the thank you store out here. With a huge order like this, they'll be happy to extend us a little credit. That's what I'm hoping. Well, a whole lot of credit when you think about it. But it just hit me, they may not have too much time to put it together. We'd sure as heck be embarrassed if we got everybody in there and nothing to put on the tables. We better get on the ball here. First, we gotta make our list, and there's no holding back. Not on the food. Not at a time like this. We carried our coffee to his desk in the front room, and he picked up a pen, licked a finger, and vigorously leafed through his tablet for a blank page. He was having fun. Let's see, meat, potatoes. Probably fried potatoes, cooked vegetables, salad, soup, dessert, the whole works. What else? Just something of everything, I guess. Every kind of meat and vegetable. Well, I guess I'll feel better if I can get a hold of the store first. Make sure what they can handle here. He picked up the phone. Of course the deer meat, we'll have to get that through some of our people. Thank you store won't have deer meat. I was thinking venison soup. That always goes good. Hold up, it's ringing. He made his pitch to the owner in his typical Mad Bear style. "Hey, how you doing? Listen, we need your help on something here. Let me tell you what's poppin'. I mean, this is really big. We're going to need a pretty hefty order here, and we were hoping you might let us square away our bill a little later. I mean, it being Sunday and all. Let me tell you what's up." I listened as he described the upcoming event, exaggerating only a little. They put the entire shopping list together on the phone, with Mad Bear repeating the owner's words aloud, giving consideration to what this little store could supply on such a short notice, and glancing occasionally at me for my nod of approval. The owner and his teenage son would gather up the whole order and bring it out in the truck as soon as possible. "Like I said, you're certainly both invited," Mad Bear repeated. "I mean, you're part of this whole thing now. Of course, though, we'll naturally take care of everything. But, I mean, what the heck? You're really helping out here." Mad Bear tossed the receiver into the air and turned to grin at me. "Great!" he exclaimed. "They're not only okay with it, they're excited. I could have told you. See, our native people, They don't have a notion about these famous performers. Got no reason to. Although they take our word for it. Our people, they just always show up whenever we have a gathering for any reason. We're a community people. But this guy, he knew all these names and he knew about the concert. And his poor kid, he couldn't even get into the concert. You know what he told me? He said, "Wait till my son learns about this. He's gonna fall over backwards." Mad Bear and I walked across and down the road to the white wooden building where the reservation kids went to school. The large center room that served for gymnasium, auditorium, and a few other functions, including town hall, took up most of the floor space. A narrow balcony with chairs and a railing went halfway across the room. People began setting up tables and covering them with smooth, white butcher paper. I suppose that this particular function was a first. These reservation people had experienced many feasts in this place. The father and son from the thank you store arrived with their truckload of provisions about the same time as the women arrived to set up the kitchen, and the preparations were soon underway. "Well," Mad Bear acknowledged as we walked back toward the house, "I know I raised a few eyebrows on the other end of the line when I called our people on this thing. I know a lot of them were thinking, here goes that Mad Bear again, drumming up some kind of big deal monkey business. Anyways, it's all coming together good. That's what we had to look in on. But I'll tell you one thing, our people are going to get a pretty good kick out of this. And not just the young ones either. Even the elders will be tickled. You watch, they'll be talking about it for many moons, as we used to say. Well, now we gotta get our own preparations to buckle down. I'm going to put together a little something for each and every one of the guests." He did. I doubted it at first, knowing how many guests would be arriving, but he apparently put together hundreds of dollars worth of little somethings. However tickled all the others might eventually become, Mad Bear himself was unmistakably excited. He nearly emptied his Mad Bear's Trading Post display cases. Some of these bone and turquoise pieces were costly items, and the historical keepsakes, I knew, were absolutely priceless. We discussed what would be appropriate for whom. The most special items, of course, went to the celebrities, but there was indeed something for everyone, including the drivers, the film crew, and the stage crew, if only a small packet of tobacco or medicinal herbs. A long caravan of buses and cars pulled up to the old schoolhouse. Performers and the crew of the Rolling Thunder Revue, the native escorts, and all the others who had joined the caravan piled out of their vehicles. There were 75 members of the Rolling Thunder Revue, and about an equal number of native men, women, and children. Most of the clan mothers and their helpers were already inside, busy with the cooking. The traditional natives were constantly holding community affairs, tribal and intertribal meetings, powwows, potlucks, socials, and ceremonies. And they, especially the clan mothers, were adept at short notice organizing. The whole bunch had been invited and the whole bunch had come. Sending word ahead to reconfirm their numbers out of concern that there were too many of them. They had no doubt expected to meet some natives and to be offered some food. What they got was song and dance, a banquet feast, and many gifts. The long rows of tables with their crisp white paper filled more than half the room. There were folding chairs around the tables and also in the narrow balcony. The remaining floor space became a stage, and the native hosts wasted no time initiating the festivities. As soon as everyone, or nearly everyone, was seated inside, the native children began their dance with one of the elders announcing each one in turn. Turtle dance, duck dance, alligator dance, and looking as though they had been rehearsing all day. Sometimes the girls danced and sometimes the boys, and sometimes they danced together. Some sang and some played drums. After many offerings, they asked their guests to return the favor. So these are a few of our traditional dances and songs we have shared with you, and now we hope you will share some of your songs with us and our people. The performers looked surprised. They had not thought they had come to work. "We can't," one of them hastened to say. "We need our instruments, and we didn't bring them." But Joan Baez jumped up and began, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and after a few verses, almost everyone joined in. If the others were inclined to follow, they were still reluctant. Joni Mitchell would be happy to sing, she said, but she really needed her guitar. The boy from the thank you store called out, "I've got one here." "That's right," said the father. "My son's guitar is out in the truck. Go and get it." So then there was a guitar, and the others were induced to contribute. Bob Dylan had been the last to arrive, and he was the last to sing. He had looked subdued, even reclusive in this crowd, until he began to perform. He sang Hurricane, and there was no way to remain restrained with it. The energy and charisma that he had used to fill huge concert halls and auditoriums bounced around inside the old schoolhouse and charged the air. Until then, the group had been rather formal and quietly attentive, but as the people got up to fill their plates, the room was buzzing with noisy excitement. I talked with one of the filmmakers who sat down beside me. The filmmakers had come prepared to work. The Rolling Thunder Revue was using the tour, in part, to produce a feature film to be called Ronaldo and Clara, and the camera people were always ready for any opportunity to capture some potential footage. The man asked me whether Madbear would be willing to be interviewed, or at least to say a few words on camera after supper. He thought it would be appropriate to do it outside among the trees. It would be dark, but there was a full moon, and they could manage some interesting lighting effects. I told him I was quite sure Madbear would agree, and we could ask him after supper. He suggested we might ask Madbear if he could make some Indian-type comments about the moon or stars or something. Then he noticed a ring on my finger, and he interrupted himself. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked. His question surprised me. I had worn that ring day and night ever since I had first put it on, and though I had never worn a ring before, I had quite forgotten about it. "Well, I don't know," I said. "It's kind of funny." That was hardly an adequate response, but I didn't feel like discussing it. "But just how did you come by it?" he persisted. I hesitated. How could I explain it? "You don't want to tell me, right? It's strange to talk about, but it doesn't have anything to do with Madbear, does it?" "No, I don't think so. I've never talked to him about it. I'm not sure he's even never noticed." "But tell me about it. I have a reason for asking." "Well, like I told you, I found it," I began, "but not like on the street or in some public place. I found it in my own drawer in my bedroom, a drawer I often use every day. Still, I found it because one day it was just there, in a bowl with some change in things." "So why not say it? It materialized." "Yeah, that's what it seemed like. That's what it was," he interjected. "Because," I went on, "one day it was just there, and there it stayed. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Maybe I thought or hoped it would disappear, but at one point, I decided it was not going to go away, and that if in 3 days, exactly from that moment it was still there, I would pick it up and examine it. Then, when I did pick it up, I decided to try it on, convincing myself that if it fit, I might as well go ahead and wear it. Well, it fit beautifully, like soft liquid on my finger. I've never taken it off." "Yep," he responded. "I guess that's the way it works, but I still don't know what it means. I have to tell you, I have the same exact ring, except I think I've had mine a lot longer. Yours is the only one I've ever seen, and I got mine in the same exact way. In the drawer, suddenly materializing, the 3 days waiting, the perfect fit, the whole bit. Maybe, eventually, you'll take yours off like I did. Mine's home now. Sometimes I wear it. I don't know if I should. Sometimes it disappears and it's nowhere around, and then I come across it again, like right at my dresser or the kitchen counter or something. Then I try to tell myself I must have left it there, but for weeks without seeing it, it's too weird. Maybe we should talk to Madbear about these things. Probably he'll know about it." I was not anxious to broach this issue with Madbear. For one thing, if he did have any thoughts, he would not likely express them on this night. I was too familiar with his native technique for avoiding answers. In any case, the chance did not present itself. As soon as all the feasting was winding down, the giving of gifts began. Madbear had what he called a little something for every one of the guests and distributed these around. I walked around and talked with the performers. Bob Dylan wanted to ask me about Madbear. He asked me something like how or whether I had experienced the authenticity of people like Rolling Thunder and Madbear. He was still sitting at his chair at the table, and I sat down on my haunches beside his chair. Our conversation was interrupted when some young person threw a mousetrap down upon him from the balcony, striking him in the wrist. He looked first startled and then hurt. Without speaking, he stood up and walked out. Many of the young people followed, shouting and grabbing at his clothes. I felt sorry for him. Another performer had only recently remarked how comfortable she had felt in this atypical group who had treated them like ordinary folks and yet so hospitably. And yet, this was the only uncomfortable incident. I walked along as though I wished to help the situation, but there was nothing I could do. Dylan went into one of the large vans and closed the door behind him. I walked between the buses to return to the building. I saw a couple of people pointing large cameras and lights at Madbear as he stood under a tree, and I stopped to watch from a distance. I noticed the silhouette of a performer behind the curtain in a window of one of the buses. He could not know that I could see him. He was holding in front of his face the medallion that Madbear had given him and had placed around his neck, and he was kissing it. I walked back inside. For the several days that I remained at this place, and no doubt for several days thereafter, Madbear talked constantly about the big feast and social, as he called it. Though he rang up a huge account on behalf of his tribe, a debt for which he would likely be held responsible, he had given away what seemed like nearly half the precious items in his museum and his trading post. He was pleased. "Good one," he kept saying, "good one. I'd say we really pulled it off." And when neighbors came around to visit, they talked about it also. "We've got to do something about these youngins, though," one elder remarked, and he and Madbear shook their heads and talked about how the young ones had changed. Except for the one incident with Dylan, I thought the kids had been remarkable. They don't have much sense of community, seems like. Not that children should be seen and not heard. We don't think that way. "Well, maybe I'm beginning to," said the old man. "No, kids should be kids. They don't have to act like adults, just interact with them, and in a good way for everybody. Now they just go out their own way. Nobody gets to really enjoy each other. Used to be they were more connected, especially with the elders. They'd relate to them, and there'd be this group spirit. It used to be a wonderful thing." "Wonder what their kids will be like," the old man mused. "The new generations? I don't know. They're changing, and that's for sure, every which way. No more guidance, and maybe one day." He paused and shook his head again. "Maybe I gotta come back as one of these kids." Madbear also talked during those several days about his project. We sat at his table with his little percolator and his endless snacks and donuts and discussed where we might go first and when. He wanted to travel to the various tribal nations, especially to those in the Southwest, to the keepers of the records and prophecies, to meet with the traditionals and spokespersons, and gather some sort of collective communication regarding the coming Earth changes and the planetary transition, which was already in sight. From traditional spokespersons of ancient tribes whose rock writings, stone tablets, and oral histories spanned thousands of years, he wanted a vision of what lay ahead, beyond the inevitable transition. "When do you think we can get started?" he kept asking. On the morning I was packing to leave, Madbear got a call from the thank you store. I overheard him talking about the bill and arrangements to pay, and he and the owner went on for some time, talking mostly, it seemed, about the event itself and the performers. "How much did all that come to?" I asked when Madbear had hung up. "They don't know for sure yet. They're still figuring. I think they'll give us some special consideration on some of it. But that's not why he called. He was thinking we might drop over there and talk to his son, or to the other kids, I guess. His friends from school. You know what that kid did? He hung his guitar on the wall with a kind of plaque or something that said, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, Ramblin' Jack, and he listed the whole bunch of them. All played on his guitar. Well, of course, none of his friends from school over there in town were there on the reservation. They couldn't have seen it, and they couldn't have known. Well, they don't believe him. They just don't believe him. His father backs him up on it, and they think they're both kidding. Of course, you'll be leaving, so you can't go over there. I might drop by after I get you to the airport, but then, I don't know what help I would be convincing those kids. You know me. I'm always grinning anyways. I can't stop laughing, even over the truth. Mad Bear drove me all the way to the airport in Buffalo. So, when do you think you'll be able to head back this way? I don't know, I answered. What needs to happen now is some research for putting a feasible budget together, for the travel mostly, and then the fundraising. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we should have pinned down a little more specific plans for the budget. I mean, have you got enough to go on? We didn't lay out our whole itinerary by any means. No, but I think we've decided we'd just bite off what we call the first pilot project first. The first trip southwest. Then, based on that, we could generate the rest of the objectives and the itinerary. I got enough to start on from our side. The question is just how to go about it. Yeah, that's the part I don't know about. Of course, we can always talk on the phone if we need to put our heads together on any more of the planning. Did I tell you my latest dream, by the way? I've been telling you my dreams, right? Well, this was a simple thing, really. Not much to it. I just saw us heading down south, down towards the Mexican border. We had this cute little caravan. I don't know who all was along, but I dreamed we were in 3 Jeeps. They were all identical, dark green, real sharp, and they were ours. You know, for the work. They had printing on both sides, on the door panels, with the name of the outfit like you and I talked about. 3 Jeeps. Think about it. We get those and we're off and running. Right, I thought to myself, dream on. We'll be lucky if we get a little gas money. You know, there was something else I was thinking about, he went on. We ought to make a little trip out to Virginia Beach, to the Edgar Cayce people. I've read up on all those Cayce readings, especially the prophecies. I've got copies on a lot of that stuff. And Nostradamus, too. Did you ever read up on the prophecies of Nostradamus? What somebody ought to do someday pretty quick is go across all this country, or the world really, and make a study of all the prophets, what they had to say. I bet a comparison of all their prophecies related to these next few decades would be an amazing thing. You'd think there'd be someone somewhere who'd jump at the chance to fund a thing like that. I mean, that'd be worth something, but then there'd be many who wouldn't know how to use it. Maybe they get more passive instead of more active. Like I've been saying all along, most people get confused between foresight and fate. We arrived at the airport and pulled up to my entrance, and he got out to shake my hand. You didn't say when you're coming back, or I guess you did, as best you could. I sure wonder when we can get started. I wish I'd be flying out with you now. But I'm just flying back to New York City right now and then later back home to California. Well, I wish we were going somewheres, anyways. There's so much to do. I'm getting pretty doggone restless, I can tell you that. That's the end of chapter 6, my friends. Nyawa, as always, for listening. Take care.